Next, for the former president, for that, let's turn to CNN legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Elliot Williams and former Trump White House lawyer and CNN legal commentator Jim Schultz. What is next, Elliot? Where do we go from here?
Sentencing in about a month. And that's standard in cases. Now, what will happen is both parties, the prosecution and the defense, will in effect submit memoranda to the judge saying, this is how we think the defendant ought to be punished. Now, obviously, the prosecutors tend to ask for a longer sentence than the defendant does. I would assume that the defense here would not ask for any jail time. Prosecutors can, and they'll lay out the reasons why, whether it's the criminal history of the defendant, the nature of the conduct, how the defendant has behaved since and prior to the crime, and all of the above. Then the judge will ultimately make a decision at that hearing in July.
Trump says that he could be put in jail for over 100 years. Probably not going to happen.
Probably not going to happen. I think you're spot on there. If you were to add up the 4-year statutory maximum on all 34 counts, then yes, in crazy town that does not exist, one could go to jail for several hundred years or whatever the number is. That doesn't happen. Number one, virtually no one ever gets the statutory maximum of any crime, no matter what. And number two, someone with no criminal history for what's called a Class E felony in New York probably won't even see jail time at all, let alone the statutory maximum. And finally, number three, because of the nature of how this crime was committed, in all likelihood, the judge would stack all the sentences on top of each other. So you wouldn't put 4 years on top of 4 years. It'd be just one sentence for all.
Yeah, if we are kind of living in crazy town, but
Yes.
not the crazy town that doesn't exist. Jim, to you, Todd Blanche said, everyone in this jury knew Trump from his time as obviously president and on The Apprentice, and because of that, he doesn't accept that Trump could get a fair trial. I mean, where would you go that people wouldn't think, of course, this is the president, this guy was on The Apprentice? I mean, where could you get a fair trial? And I guess my real question is, if that's sort of the point he's making, how does that speak to having success with an appeal?
I don't think that's the strongest argument they're going to have on appeal. I think that's a political talking point that is also a legal talking point. I think you're going to see other mechanisms for appeal. I think the one thing that's certainly going to be an appellate issue is the whole Harvey Weinstein issue, right? That the case that came down recently where one of his convictions was dismissed. This was not a sex crimes case, so all 34 convictions, if you will, if that testimony relating to what happened that night in that room was found to be more prejudicial than probative by the appellate court, then it could have the effect of overturning all of these convictions, and it wouldn't be on a case-by-case basis. I think another avenue for appeal that they're going to look at strongly on the defense side is this whole issue of notice and due process as it relates to these underlying crimes, right? The underlying crime that kind of brings it to the felony count, the crime that they were covering up, if you will, that was alleged that they were covering up. It's the whole campaign finance issue. Was that properly charged? Is that properly an underlying crime in this matter? Were they given appropriate notice by way of the indictment? Though all those issues are going to play out on appeal, this is going to be a long appellate process, going forward after sentencing.
Elliot, what do you think of the substance of those potential appeals?
They're not frivolous. A defendant always has a right to appeal, whether it's his sentencing, his conviction, and so on. These were somewhat complex legal issues. Now, the prosecution ably argued the judge was incredibly careful in substantiating the reasons why he was doing different things. But these won't be laughed out of court, even if they ultimately lose.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, the idea of what the underlying crime is that super clear here? Could it have been clearer in the way the process should have had the jury outline that?
I don't know, and it's hard to say. Now, look, many statutes are arson or homicide where you kill the guy or not. It's very straightforward. Most statutes, particularly when you deal with financial crimes, business crimes, are actually quite complex, where judges have to be creative in how they explain something to the jury, and prosecutors have to be creative in how it's argued to the jury. But the simple fact of falsifying a business record to commit or conceal another crime is quite straightforward, regardless of the fact that it's not murder.
Let's play some sound from Trump right now. He talked about deciding not to testify in his own defense. Let's listen.
I would have testified. I wanted to testify. The theory is you never testify, because as soon as you testify, anybody, if it were George Washington, don't testify, because they'll get you on something that you said slightly wrong, and then they sue you for perjury. Well, I said, what do you need to go through? And all you wanted to do is testify simply on this case. Because I would have loved to have testified. To this day, I would have liked to have testified.
Jim, do you think the outcome would have been different if Trump had been able to testify?
No, not at all. And and quite the opposite, right? Because he would have opened him. The door was wide open to all kinds of questioning that would have impeached his testimony that he and his defense lawyers wouldn't have wanted to come out. So no, it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the trial in any way, shape, or form. The strategic decision by the lawyers for him not to testify was a smart one. I just think this is more political bravado than anything else in typical Donald Trump fashion.
How do you see, Jim, the gag order at this point and Donald Trump's clear references to Michael Cohen?
So I think he's going to blow through this gag order. I think he's going to continue to blow through the gag order. Post sentencing, I don't think it applies at that point, but up until sentencing, I think it does. And I think he's probably going to exercise what he will call his the public domain, that the trial is over, and that the gag order should no longer apply in his mind.
Jim Schultz, Elliot Williams, great to get your perspective. Thanks for being with us.